Hi, everyone. Welcome. And I'm Andrea Sato with the Wilton Library. I work on adult programs here, and we're very glad you are here this morning. We're pleased once again to partner with SPED NET, and this time with the Southport School for this very important topic on executive functioning. So that's really all I have to say. I'm going to turn the program over to Eve Kessler, and she'll introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm Eve Kessler, co-founder of SPED NET. We've been a support and advocacy and education group in Wilton and now in Fairfield County for 26 years. We have an amazing website that has videos of all our presentations on there, along with the presentation itself and materials. So please take a look at it. It's spednet.org. This presentation is presented with Wilton Library, Wilton Youth Services, Wilton Public Schools, and Newtown SPED PTA. So executive functioning, there are a lot of people in here. It's a really important topic for kids and adults alike. Planning, organizing, initiating tasks, completing tasks, regulating emotions. Pretty much executive functions get us through the day. They're crucial for independent success both in and out of school. Jeff Ruggiero is an educator with over 30 years of teaching and administrative experience in special education. He serves as the associate head at the Southport School. Jeff has advanced degrees in learning differences and school administration. He designs and implements effective instructional programming for students with dyslexia, language-based learning issues, and ADHD. He's also a certified Orton-Gillingham associate practitioner and a dyslexia practitioner through the International Dyslexia Association. Do you want to leave, how do you want to do questions? We didn't discuss it. Do you want to leave them to the end, or would? Okay, if you do have questions during it, my partner Carol and I will have microphones, so it'll be able to be picked up by the audio. So this is being videotaped and audio taped. Everybody here will get a copy. It'll be on our website as well. If you don't mind putting your phones on silence, and we'll start. Thank you.
My phone on silent off by mistake. Okay, here we go. Thank you, Eve. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Wilton SPED NET and Wilton Library for hosting. It's a small world. Lucia's mom is hosting today, the Wilton Library. She said, you may not know, but my daughter went to Southport School years ago when it was Eagle Hill Southport. I had her daughter as a student when she was 14. She's 35. I'm a little older than that. And I become feeling older by the minute. So I've been with the Southport School for 34 years. I met my wife at the Southport School. So together we share the most boring resume. One job, bunch of different titles. The executive function work's a 10-year-long project that 10 or more years actually been working on this with some area neuropsychologists, some researchers across the country. Because in my experience at the Southport School and special ed background, I realized that, our goal is to help our kids with their remedial skills, right? Their reading, their writing, their foundational math skills so they can close that gap and become that independent learner. But I think something happens, right? So when our kids begin to struggle, right? We start, providing their schools, we at home, we start providing some accommodations, some support. And sometimes those accommodations, those support, lower those expectations for these kids. It makes them realize that this stuff's hard for me and it's not expected of me. I can't do these things. Right? So then we get in that situation where they're somewhat learned helpless, right? They've learned to rely on the adults in the room. the teachers, the paraprofessionals, and the you parents at home, right? So thinking about that it took me, unfortunately, about 20 years to realize that, hey, when they started to think about ADHD and executive function, like, boy, that's something all of our kids could use. How can we build a program and integrate a program into the remedial instruction that simultaneously develops that independent learning? And through our studies over the past 15 or so years with this, we've realized, as Eve said earlier, articulated very well, these are life skills, right? These aren't just going to help us in school. They're pervasive, and a good pervasive. They're important, right? So we need to try to develop them, need to make them conscious for our kids. When I started meeting with parents, a most common question became, what can we do at home to support it? So that's where this kind of was born out of, this presentation. And that's what I enjoy about doing this work, is this program is pretty dynamic. In the education field, the research on executive function is relatively new, and it keeps coming, which is great. Because then we can look at our program, improve it, make those modifications as we go along. So our goals today, I want you to have an understanding, the knowledge, the language of executive function development, so you can support that at home. I'm going to show you how to use games and activities to help your children better understand executive functions. As I told you earlier, my wife and I were special ed background. We met at the school. We have 2 children, those poor kids, right? You don't want to be school at home, right? Resist the urge. So let's try to make it a little bit easier. Our kids were not impressed with any background that we had. So I'm going to show you how games and activities can help. And then how we can make those connections and how we can keep this at the conscious level for our kids, these executive functions, so that they see us doing them. We validate their efforts and see that. And then, as Eve mentioned, we'll do some question and answer, and maybe through some of our discussions today, too, some cooperative problem solving, for lack of a better term, getting more clarity, exchanging ideas with each other, I think is going to be valuable. I'm a teacher at heart, so I am going to ask you to participate. So I apologize up front. I'll close my eyes if anyone wants to leave. I won't notice. Hopefully we'll learn by doing, just, as we profess when we talk about executive functions at the school. So for your first task, you can jot it down, talk to your neighbor. I just want you to identify one task or activity or hobby that your child does very well. Okay, think of something that they do. Okay? Could be something for fun. Could be organized. Could be impromptu. Just jot that down. Talk amongst yourselves for a minute or two about it. If you have that activity packets in there, just kind of think about, what does that look like? I'll stay with this. Okay. Okay. So that was good. A lot of conversation there. That's great. If it was silent, I'd be worried. I can't think of anything. No, I think it's super important to do this. I try to do this regardless of what topic I'm presenting on. We're going to use this. We're going to keep this in mind as we start to think about this through that executive function lens that we're going to develop. But I like to do this at every presentation I give, because I think what's somewhat unfair, and I fell into this trap with my own son who had his challenges through school. When kids start to struggle, our kids start to struggle, we start describing them and characterizing them as a collection of their weaknesses and challenges. And we can't do that, right? We have to think about where their strengths are, what they're good at, validate that, show them that you can use these strengths to overcome some of those challenges. We're going to do that today as we look through and you get a better understanding of the executive functions. And you can start to see, hopefully, why or make those connections to that task. Oh, now I see why my daughter is good at that. That's right in her ballpark. Okay. So if you take nothing else from this presentation, please take that with you. Remember, think about their strengths. So what is executive functioning? I presented to a group of educators last year in St. Louis, and I posed this question. I'm not gonna have you call out answers. These were educators, and no one answered. And then someone in the back of the room said, "We don't want to be wrong." I said, "True, right?" But in this type of question here, what is executive functioning? It's pretty broad. It's hard to be wrong. As we talked about research, right? We think about all the different perspectives. And we're going to give you ours. I'm going to give you the one that we work with. But if we think about executive functioning through the years, look at some of these dating back to 1966, right? Luria, underlying actions, goal direction, right? In the 70s, started to think about it through the brain, the frontal cortex, brain organization, outcomes of behavior. Walsh and Pennington in 88, appropriate problem-solving set, monitoring and controlling, knowledge and strategies, metacognition or metacognitive level, into 2000s, coordinated operations in a flexible manner. McCloskey, who does great work with this, set of independent but coordinated processes. Dawson and Goray, organize our behavior, override immediate demands. Right? Definitions of executive functions over the years, not a single one used the word school, right? They're pervasive. No one said reading, writing, math, right? They're used for any task, okay? And that's critically important to keep in mind. So our definition of executive function that we use is the thought processes required to plan and direct activities. Try to keep it simple. I try to keep it global for our kids. Any activity. Something you want to do, something you have to do, something you don't want to do. But that's our definition. I'm going to try to show this video. My executive function challenge for today is that this is the first time I'm presenting using PowerPoint and not Google Slides. So I'm going to actually have to go to this video and see if I could show you this, a little bit about what we're talking about. Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions thus far? Any questions or thoughts or comments? Anything I can further elaborate on? I don't want to say that's a short course in an executive function overview because nothing I do verbally is short, as my kids will say. No one wants to listen to you for 2 hours. So they said, make sure it's interactive. I said, okay. So when we think about that, right, and that's the first thing we did as a school, is we said, okay, we're going to spend an entire year now that we've learned about executive functions. We're just going to start to recognize them in our own life. And we're going to start recognizing them around our school and our school day. Outside the classroom first, then inside the classroom. And it's something to do at home too. And think about those strengths that you have. Why are they your strengths? And how do you use them? What do you gravitate towards? What are some of those strategies that you develop to overcome some of those challenging ones? Right? So we're all successful adults for a reason, and executive functions play a large part in that. And that's something that we want to make sure that we articulate to our kids. But sometimes the best way to do that is through not just what we say, but what we do. So just briefly, our instructional process, and then we're going to walk through some of this once again, trying that fine line of school at home, make some connections to how we can do some things at home that will engage our kids and foster the development and identifying those strengths and some of those challenges. But what we always do is we want to introduce first the executive function, then we develop it, then we connect it, then we reinforce it. Okay? These are pretty abstract constructs, but our kids are pretty bright. That's one thing we know about all of our kids, bright kids, right? They can handle this. It's just a matter of making it something that they can touch, they can see, they can experience. Okay? And once we're able to do that, then we have a reference point. If we can think of that task that they're good at, right, and we can make that connection, you're good at that. When you're doing this, you're able to inhibit, shut that down, hit all those right keys. You're able to see ahead, play on, know what's coming next, and anticipate. That's a skill you can use when we do anything else. Right? We can show them this through a lot of fun activities at home to develop some of the other hidden talents that they have as well. And then we'll talk more about how we can reinforce them as well at home. So why do we use games and activities? They're great tools because if you find the right ones, right, they're fun. They don't remind us of school. You can target specific functions. Many of them have multiple functions at play, but you can isolate just one. They're reaffirming, right? They're non-threatening. If it's a game a child's good at, like Connect 4, right? Hey, you're really good at this. You're really good at planning. You're really good at shifting. Every time I move here and you have to change your strategy, you're able to do that. That's fantastic. They can be quick, right? You can play just a quick game of something that really develops one of those skills. And we'll play a couple games as we go along. It allows for modeling. Right? We can do and use self-talk and explain to them what we're doing, how we modeled that, or identifying someone else who's showing a certain function. And it definitely emphasizes the doing over the knowing. It's not book work. Right? It's not school work. It's you did something and your executive function of blank allowed you to do that. Or you use that EF to do that. That's the doing piece that's critical. And that experience can help with those connections. You can use that when you're doing math. You can use that when you're cleaning your room. My kids didn't feel they could use any of them when they're cleaning their room, but we worked on that. So we think about that. I don't think anyone came here expecting to play a game of Simon Says. So we won't, okay? But please indulge me. We're going to try an introductory activity that we do that isolates what we think the executive function of inhibition, okay? It's called the Stroop test. If you're not familiar, it's a modified version of the Stroop test. I'm going to ask you to do 3 tasks in a row, okay? It just needs to be loud and proud, okay? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to name the colors, okay? So we have 3 colors. I apologize for those that suffer from color blindness. I didn't know how to adapt this, but I will work with our DEI coordinator on that. Yellow, red, and blue. So when I say go, I want you to read across as quickly as you can as a group. Okay, is everyone ready? Thank you in advance. Ready, set, go. Perfect. Okay, now, I just want you to read the name of the color. Going across again, Once again, there's only 3. Red, we have green and blue. That came up as yellow to me. Ready? Go. Perfect. Okay, now name the color. Ready? Go. Not so, yeah, okay. All right. If anything, it's a test of perseverance. So thank you for those of you who hung in there, right? How does that illustrate inhibition? Once we've learned to read, we can't help but not read, right? In the back of the room, I said, what color is that sign in the back of the room? And inevitably, somebody's going to say exit. It's red. We can't not read it, right? Who does well on this? Our emerging readers. They can't read the words, right? But that's inhibition, right? I'm trained, I have to do this specific task. I want to do something else, okay? So when we think about that, what's important that we do, and we won't go through this whole, in the just interest of time, just the debrief, but what we do then is we can have that conversation because we've got that tangible moment. We have that opportunity now to say, okay, what made this task challenging? We can label that. That's inhibition, right? This is what we need to do. Sometimes we have to stop what we're doing or what we want to do and think about what we need to do. You know, remember when you played this game or, you saw them at sports or at dance or at piano. That's inhibition at work. Sometimes it's hard to inhibit, like when we're out, when we're at a restaurant, when we're in a crowd, when we've got things on our mind, right? But you did so well with this. How did you do it? The most powerful strategies are going to come from them, right? We can give them all the strategies in the world, but it's the ones that they've had a hand in creating. It's going to help them with these metacognitive skills. So this is all in the PowerPoint, which you have or will get. But, a lot of the different games, the experiences, like Simon says, some of the movement activities, like charades and freeze dance, freeze tag, things that make them, you can't talk in charades, right? You can't, when the music stops, you have to freeze, even though you want to continue to dance. Yet you're actively developing, engaging inhibitory control. The quiet activities, like we tried the marshmallow test, could be fun. Playing the quiet game or a game of statue where they just have to pose. Exerting that metacognitive control, the thought processes to control the behavior. And in your classic games, if you ever play bingo is a good one. They have to, keep all that stuff in mind. Simon is always fun. Taboo, where you can't say certain words to describe an object, right? Once again, inhibitory control. A game like Operation. All those things can be used to help our kids get a good flavor and a good feel about that mind control over behavior, that inhibition. Because our outcomes, right, what do we want to do? We want to provide active practice in that stop and think, right? In that, what do I want to do? What do I have to do? Let me pause for a moment and make sure I have that. We want to identify and develop verbal and physical inhibition, right? So we want to think about it from a balance of things that we can do that involve thinking before speaking or following a specific rule and inhibiting a different, and physical, following a certain rule of action, inhibiting the action that you want to do. And once again, recognizing and developing those strategies that help our kids inhibit. What helps you inhibit? What do you think of when you know it's time to listen or you're not allowed to speak? What do you do? So those are some of the things that we try to, as our outcome, when we think about playing these games and having those conversations with our kids. When we think about self-monitoring, we're thinking about how am I doing? We're not going to do the group not exchange because I'm sure someone would get hurt. But that's the one where the kids have the rope or they can use their hands and they have to weave their way through. When we think about self-monitoring, and this is a big one because you see this a lot when we sign up our kids for a variety of different organized activities. And what we're hoping is that through these organized activities, through the emulation of peers, through the leadership of scout leaders and coaches and whatnot, that our kids will develop self-monitoring, will read the room and be able to fall in line and do what's expected and adjust accordingly. There's so many dynamics at play there, though, makes it hard for them, for many kids. You know, and I've been on both sides of this as a parent watching coaches, as a Cub Scout den leader who was way over his head. If they were relying on me to run that meeting, that was hard, even as an educator. So it's something we do have to think about developing at home because we know our kids and giving them that active practice in being part of a task, being part of a group, working together, knowing that, hey, if 3 people are working and you're over here doing something different, you're not being a good team member. If you're not contributing to the group, if you're getting frustrated, if you're not offering strategies, getting them in those habits of developing those skills, being able to be a constructive part of the group, read the room. What should we all do next? So we start to think about these activities, making a creation with some household items where everybody has to just kind of think about what do we want to make? There's compromise, there's cooperation, there's flexibility in thought, there's perspective taking, there's sharing of ideas. There's all of these built in, building puzzles and making models in terms of finding your strengths, your challenges, cooperative poster making, keeping kids engaged in reading the room, and a handful of games that can lead to that as well. Because our outcomes here, right, is we want to make sure that we're working on and controlling behaviors in a group so that when they transition to other tasks, other opportunities, soccer practice, Girl Scouts, that these experiences will carry over and they'll be able to read the room, they'll be able to show their strengths, they'll be able to adjust their behavior accordingly as needed. It's also important too, because I think it's empowering, we talk about self-monitoring, to think about the attributes that our kids bring to an activity, right? What are your strengths? I do a pretty good job of listening. That's good. I'm pretty positive when people contribute. I think teaching our kids those is important, not just getting all the right answers or having all the good ideas, right? It's I think, interactive, recognizing when behavior is outside the norm, finding their ways to work back, and dealing with emotions that can determine behavior in a certain task. Do you get overcome? And this is where that crossover of the behavior and the emotional controls, we teach them in tandem because they're so, I think, wound tightly. So move on to shift. This is a shift activity. I'm not going to have you do this one, but it's in your packet. It's a version of categories, right? When you think about this activity, listing one item for each category, beginning with the letter M, right? What we're thinking about here as we do this in going through, we're constantly shifting our mindset to, okay, what do I do next? I can't come up with one. Where do I go next? right? Giving that active exposure to shifting gears, right? To changing based on demands, okay? And that's an important skill for our kids that we can use a game like Categories. We can do things like scavenger hunts or Simon Says, or hide and seek, to change, be flexible, to move. We can do things like a word search, right? Learning to move on from one word. If we can't find one, to try to find another. Hey, I saw the beginning of another word. Let me look and see if that one's on our list. Matching activities. When we pick one, planning a scheme. Oh, something else came up. That one was taken. What else can I do? Games like Crazy Eights, where strategy and Uno are constantly changing based on the action of another. Those are great games that really illustrate and give our kids that experience and that sense of shift, right? Poker's on here. I'm not condoning that, but it is something that, once again, you're thinking strategy based on what other cards have been played, what might be out, what do I know, what do I not know, and you're constantly changing that. The same with Scrabble, getting the letters you need versus the letters you want or don't want, and what can I do where a player has played theirs, I have to play somewhere else. It gets our kids thinking about shifting that mindset. A lot of this is more on a cognitive level, not as much on the emotional level, but I still think feeling those shifts will help them certainly in a social situation as well. What are we trying to do when we're shifting? You know, we're validating that mental process that's guiding their action. You had this in mind, you decided to do something else. You've got to recognize those situations when those shifts are needed, when they occur, what do I do? How do I do it? And we think about cause and effect. Very important when we're thinking about shift. What caused you to shift? What was the effect? What was the desired outcome? I think those are critical in terms of thinking about that when we're talking about those. We'll do this one, experiencing emotional control. If you have a pencil and paper handy, try this task. Write your name with your opposite hand. First try it in print, then try it in cursive. So your non-dominant hand. So I recognize a few familiar faces. We have some TSS moms out there. So I make sure this is clear. We're not in the business to frustrate your kids. And I want you guys to know that too. This task, right? Frustrating, right? But we think about emotional control. When does emotional dysregulation occur? Right? For our kids, a lot of times, right? When things don't go their way, when they're frustrated, right? We think about that. We're not in the business to frustrate our kids, but we do know that certain things do frustrate our kids. So there are some things that we can put in front of them, things that we can do. A game like Foursquare, for example, kids have to get used to being out, right? You have to get used to playing by the rules and accepting that I can't stay in the game the whole time, right? When we think about quiet activities like that, involved a lot of self-control, that sometimes, yes, even though you're doing something really well, situations dictate we have to start over, right? And it's just feeling that. But on the other side, think of some of those classic games and go over that a little bit too, that have those time elements that also bring about some of that emotional dysregulation, that stress, right? Sometimes in a game like Sorry, you have to go back to start. But on the other end, you can look at some quiet activities like therapeutic coloring pages. Like if I'm really, really amped up, try coloring a little bit. Does that bring you some calm or some peace? Does that bring you back? Role-playing emotions. Oftentimes with role-play emotions, we get to a point where we can see where the primary causes are for our kids. And we want to send that message that it's okay to have emotions. That's the critical message here. But it's what we do to regulate those emotions, the mental processes that form the actions, that maybe we do jumping jacks when we're too amped up. Maybe we run in place when we're too low, or we do some wall push-ups. Finding those things that get us back to optimal, if we're too charged, if we don't have enough energy. And hopefully some of those strategies become habits. We have them, right? Do we get up and go to the water cooler midway through a meeting? Do we take a walk after a long day of work? Do we color? Do we draw? Do we paint? What are some of those things we do first thing in the morning to get ourselves energized? And it's important for our kids to recognize this, because those are our outcomes. Those are our goals, right? Validate not only that it's okay to have emotions, but identify, promote, celebrate. Boy, you were in a really awful mood when we left the grocery store. It was really hard for you to accept the fact that you couldn't buy that cereal that's loaded with more sugar than anything else. But you bounce back. You listen to some music or whatever it was that they did to pull themselves out of that. I think is critical that we're sending that message. And just thinking about those as, wow, that was a great strategy. Because the more we recognize it, the more we validate it, the more we increase the chance that they'll use that strategy again. Could you give me an example? You're talking about overregulation of emotions.
So if they kind of squash their own feelings and overly inhibit themselves rather than regulate at a more like normal level. So like I understand it if they don't regulate, but what if they're overly regulating so they're not?
Yeah, I still look at that through the lens of emotional dysregulation, because I think somewhere along the lines there's been experiences where emotions, sharing or showing emotion was frowned upon or not accepted.
Is that still an executive function, or is that more of an emotional issue?
I think if we're talking about inability to open up, I think it's probably more of a counseling, that why am I not doing that? Why am I not opening up? I mean, sometimes it's, I think sometimes we see emotional dysregulation as a result of another dysregulated function. The lack of inhibition can, cause that extra stress, that amped up. But I think that's more on the emotional side of the opening up. We work in tandem quite a bit with our counselors on helping our kids. Some of our kids open up because for a lot of kids, unfortunately, they've gotten some negative feedback when they shared emotions from other peers, from adults. So they're less willing to do so. So it's kind of bringing that back. Sorry, I don't think I answered it.
You did.
Okay. So we think in moving on to some of the cognitive controls. Are any questions about the behavior or emotional controls? As I said, if there's any, go ahead.
Frontal cortex. Back when you were referring to the frontal cortex and like connecting the knowledge and using that to act upon it. So the emotional aspect of it, if like kind of like the fight or flight mode kind of thing. How do you kind of like work on that to have them like recognize it?
Yeah.
Like
and that's where I think I think that's the key message here. That knowledge that's building in that from the back of the brain is through experiences. So the
by
more of these
exercising.
experiences that you can build, and you run that line where if we can do something that, yeah, may bring out emotionality, like building a card house or something like that, but we know what may happen and what we want to talk about, versus trying to use a teachable moment, especially in an emotional dysregulation situation. Teachable moment's tough then.
Right.
They're not open and receptive to, hey, let's try to use our strategy. That's going to almost be a post-mortem. What we're trying to do is create more of those experiences in the back of the brain that they can draw from to make those connections. So we can say the next time, think of the card house. Are we in that situation where you're starting over, right? I've got to redo this whole thing. You know, you made your bed, not the best job. It's like the card house. We got to start again. Okay, I can do it. What do I need to do? I think, I don't want to say manufacturing because it sounds so manipulative, but we're creating those scenarios, those situations, I think, through non-threatening experiences, games, activities. You know, when we think about that, does that answer the question?
Kind of like, so over time, they'll take those experiences and apply it to something that isn't.
Yeah, I think so,
Yeah,
right? I
okay.
think we're coming at it from, just from, I think reinforcement theory, right, was something that we study in education, that the more you get positive reinforcement on something, either validation, right, from someone, self-validation because you see success or you feel success or result, you're more likely to do it more often. So the more of those experiences you can call upon, the better you're going to feel about, yes, I can do this. I can have some control over this. And that's the hard part. I think that's the hard part. It's a chicken and the egg, right? It's looking at, for example, the violinist, and people have studied this, musicians, people who play instruments have strong executive functions. Which came first? Are they good at music because they have strong executive functions? Or did learning an instrument, the actual task, right, build those executive functions for them? And I think it's somewhere between. I think that there's definitely correlation both ways. So I think it's thinking about those experiences in that way. And I think it's something you can think about too when you think about working memory. Keeping the I'm going on a picnic is a great game for this, right? In your packet, I think there's an activity. I'm thinking of an animal. We should play that a lot at the dinner table, right? Things where you have to hold on to that information. Okay, it lives in the water, and kids are giving you guesses, and someone says monkey, and you say, well, remember where it lived? You got to hold that information while you're getting another piece of information. Those games are great. Rhyming, clapping, rhythm, songs. Those games are fun. Repeat the beat, anything like that, a scavenger hunt. Those movement activities are going to build that working memory. What are some of those items that I need to find? What have we found? What's missing? Hidden pictures, crossword puzzles, 20 questions, the I Spy game. They're always fun to do. Once again, where we can have those opportunities that, what am I looking for? What do I want to find? I found something else. Is it on that list? And some of your classic games, I think some of these repeat, but Battleship's a good one. Go Fish. Did I ask that person for that number? What did the other person ask for that they didn't have? What might I use? Concentration, location, finding where things are. Always a great working memory tasks. Because when we think about working memory and keeping it in mind, we want to just, it's really building that focus. It's paying attention to those pieces of information, because this is going to help us complete tasks. Making connections to that dual coding, right? Processing the verbal and the visual information, making that exchange, and developing those strategies. Do we use keywords? Do we use self-talk? Do we repeat those directions? Do we visualize what we need to do? Right? The primacy and recency effects. If we give someone 3 directions, the child, for example. Maybe they'll do the first, sometimes they'll do the last, but the middle one's going to be the most challenging, right? It's giving them those opportunities, putting them in a position to hold information while information's coming in, to build that working memory. We used to call this sustained attention, but it's really holding the information that's keeping the attention and manipulating it. Because once that image is lost, the attention's going to be lost. So can they visualize that? Can they layer on more pieces of information? And that's critical. This is also in the packet, but I want to leave some time for questions. Experiencing cognitive controls, hitting the go button. Brain teasers are great for this. The solution's also in the packet too. So if you have that with you, or you already know the answer, you're connecting these dots with no more than 4 straight lines, but they have to be connected, all 4 lines. So when we think about that, here's the 2 solutions. We think about activities like this, these types of brain teasers. Brain teasers, I think, are great. I think my parents were ahead of their time because that's what we did in the restaurants when we inhaled our food in 3 minutes and my parents wanted to spend a little bit longer time there at the restaurant, is they put out brain teasers and things like that for us to do. Because they're great, because it gets you thinking about, where do I start? How do I complete this task? And it also, I think, shows, hey, I have a different starting point than somebody else, but we all got to the finish line. We think about sometimes the paralysis, for lack of a better term, that our kids or we can experience in a difficult task when we just don't even know where to get started, right? Do we follow directions? Do we reread? Do we look at the picture? Do we ask for help? Do we dive in and just, if that doesn't work, try something else? So it's these types of games and activities and brain teasers, acting out processes, mazes, word searches. You don't have to find the first word. A crossword puzzle, you don't have to start with the first clue just to get you started. Because what happens, right? What happens when a child or an individual, right, is starting a task, can't get started, right? Then, like we were talking about earlier with Amy's question, then this becomes a source of emotional dysregulation. And I get really stressed. I don't even know where to start. I got to finish this task. I can't even get started. I'm running out of time. Right? It's giving our kids that exposure and that confidence to try, to step in and give it a shot. And some of those games, I think, are fun ones too. The immediate feedback that you get from a game like Jenga, Pictionary, what to draw. Just start drawing something. What ice piece to break? There's many options. Because when we're thinking about this, we're, like I said, building that confidence, linking that first step to that final outcome. How does this get you there? And validating the fact that that first step can be different for everyone or different every time. When we think about games and controls and activities that develop the planning and organizing, and we think about the messy room, take a look. What would you do first? What would be the first 3 things you'd do? I'm not going to have you turn and talk this time, unless you want to. Right? So you could sort things out by attribute. Where are the clothes? Where are the toys? Right? Throw out the garbage. You could start with just picking up garbage. Right? We could start left to right, front of the room to back of the room. Right? So many different options, so many different processes. And if you have kids map this out, what would be the first 3 things you'd do? Sharing that. It's realizing that it's important to have a plan. The plan is going to get you where you need to go. But everyone's plan might be different. What might I need? I'll need a mop and a bucket. I'll need sanitizer. I would need lots of sanitizer in that room. I'd have a hard time there. But what are some of those things that we need to do? Building models like Legos, same kind of thing. If they're not following directions, some of our kids, our school, very bright and creative minds. sometimes the way that they can create a Lego structure and think outside the box is just flat out amazing. And it's embracing that. It's showing them that as a strength as well, that they have that ability to plan, to organize games, movement games like obstacle courses, cooking and baking. I think we've gotten a lot out of this with my own kids. My wife and I both enjoy cooking. So just walking through and following a plan and building a plan. And there's so many opportunities there to focus on the planning, the organizing of the ingredients, the materials. Include the cleanup. That was our mistake. Include the cleanup in the plan. Okay. Quiet activities, right? Telling a story, recapping. Those are important, I think. I have to think through, am I beginning, middle, end? Summarize the movie, but please don't make it longer than the movie itself, right? Mazes, puzzles, and then some of your classic games you see again that I think talk a little bit about more of that planning involved and, what's my strategy going into a game like Jenga or Quiddler with the letter cards I have in my hand. Because we want to reinforce the importance of planning, to complete tasks effectively, validate the fact that plans can be different but are effective. And, give them some of those strategies, right? I make a list every time we go to the store. Or if we've got errands to run, I jot down some of them because inevitably if I'm out, I'm going to forget one. We're going to skip Home Depot or something. That's important to model, but also give our kids active processes. One of the things we used to do quite a bit of with our kids is whenever they wanted to have a friend over, we would say, okay, we need to know what you're going to do. Make a plan. And it can't be Xbox, 1, 2, 3, right? You have to have different activities. What are you planning on doing? And what are some of the, once again, that cognitive flexibility, that shift. What are some other backup things too? Because what if so-and-so doesn't want to play Xbox? What if they want to do something else? So that problem solving. But getting them to think about those plans and the plan of their day is very important. Going back to brain teasers, I think we get a lot of use out of this one. I don't know if you've seen this one before. A task that definitely focuses on task monitoring. Am I on track? Am I following the rules? Am I doing what's expected? Take a minute to give that a look, see if you could solve it. Anyone have the solution? Anyone have the solution? What can we bring over first? Right? If we brought the fox over, right, we'd leave the chicken alone with the feed. Right? So there's our task monitoring. Right? Thank you. Perfect. Scripted perfectly. We wrote a script. I'd made sure that one was coming. Right? So, okay, we can't do that. So we got to go back. What could be our first move? Bring the chicken over. We bring the chicken over, what happens? Does the fox eat the seed? No, unless he's hungry. So great, we've got the chicken over, though. What do we do next? Right, exactly. Yeah, you bring over the corn, you bring back the chicken, you bring over the fox. Exactly. You start to figure out through the rules of the game and adjust accordingly to make sure you get them there. Okay? Our kids do really well with these things because once again, they go outside the box. They just bring it, you bring over the feed, you bring the chicken back, you got the feed over there, you take the fox, bring him over, and then you go back and get the chicken and you're good to go, which is great. And you're starting to think about that as a strength, that I can monitor, I can move along, and I can complete my tasks. The brain teasers, the yoga poses, monitoring your breathing. How am I doing? Your positions. Scavenger hunts are great for this too. How are we doing? What do we have left? How much time do we have? What are reasonable items that we are left to go? Can we divide and conquer here? Matching sorting activities are always great for task monitoring. Is this in the right group? Can you consider this green? Does this have wheels? What are the categories? What are the rules? Crossword puzzles. Once again, some of those strategy games. I've got a lot of cards. What's left? Who should I give the draw to, or the draw 4 to? How am I going to organize this game to get to where I need to go? What's my Connect 4 strategy? If that was blocked, what can I do next? All great ways to foster task monitoring. Because really what we want to do is that self-monologue. Is that how am I doing? Am I on track? Checking in, right? We have to make sure that we're emphasizing the importance of monitoring progress, right? It may result in a shift in thinking and a shift in action. And we want to make that connection between the ability to self-check periodically to goal-oriented tasks. That's going to help me get to the finish line, meeting the task requirements, meeting that time frame. Okay? So we think about that, right? Going back to the model, the introduce, the develop, the connect, the reinforce. We can see where this connects academically. We could see where this type of cycle can be created at home through games, through activities, through just things that you do, planning trips, camping trips, going to amusement parks, planning their opening routine, getting them to their first soccer practice, all of these things, baking, cooking, family game night, opportunities at the dinner table to really sneak in some of this EF development at home. Because we think about it, executive functions are everywhere. If we went back to this messy room, right, now through that lens, right, of executive functions, when you think of that room, what might be some of the executive function challenges? What do you need to do to be successful? Yeah, not get overwhelmed, right? So regulation. You got to regulate your emotions. This is an obscenely messy room, and this is like a challenging task. So one thing I got to do is make sure I bring that temperature down. Use one of my strategies. Take a couple deep breaths. Whatever strategy I need to use. Run around, get a little energy out before I get to work here. Definitely regulation at play. What else? Plan, right? We talked about that through planning. Organizing. What am I going to do first? This is overwhelming. Inhibition, right? You come back 5 minutes later, my son, he'll find something under the bed that he's playing with. You're like, and he's 22. Now, I digress. Initiation, right? Same thing. Where do I even start? It doesn't matter as long as you pick one, right? And it's okay if they learn from that. And that's the hard part, right? Because we think of the other functions at play, that shift, that task monitoring. If they decide for some ungodly reason to make the bed, even though there's tons of things on it first, sometimes we have to say, okay, see how that goes, right? It's a learning experience. And if they get there, great. But it's thinking through those opportunities. And it's in the packet, but we map these out, all the different ways that the functions at play, just cleaning that room. And when we think about it, I know we've been here a long time, so I'm not going to ask you to participate anymore. I know my audience, I got to read the room. If you identify a task, right, that you ask your child at home that always seems to be a challenge, that second half of that sheet, it gives you that opportunity to think about it from the EF lens. What makes that so difficult that they avoid that all the time, right? What makes it so hard for them? model building, Lego building. For my son, it was, I just don't know where to get started. So we buy them all, but he never wanted to do them. I just want to freestyle. Well, then he spent $60 on R2-D2. It doesn't look like R2-D2. I could buy you a regular set of Legos. But it's once we figured out, okay, what do I need to do? Do I look at the picture, use those directions, use the visuals, find a YouTube video, something? It's empowering, right? What strength could we use, right? His ability to visualize. Yeah.
And then, there's also a time element to it.
Yep.
If they want to make the R2-D2 Lego.
Right. And you want to restrict the time, or you want them to finish it in a certain time?
No, if they have to move on, to another task.
Oh, the shift. Yeah,
right,
to me, that's a shift, right? But, going back to your time management, I think the one thing to think about when you're doing these things is find something that they do well, right? Something that they're able to do in a certain period of time, because time management comes up all the time, okay? So I do want to address that. Okay, and what is it that helps? And what are some things that they're good at that can help them? If they're great at planning and organizing, then maybe we make a checklist every morning. Or maybe we lay out some things at night that's going to help us get to the car when we need to get to the car. And we have to resist that urge and impulse not to do that. When we think about that shifting, right, it's kind of like taking something that they've done that they're good at. How did you make that shift? What helps you leave something that you really, really like to do to move on? And maybe it's, I do well with give me 2-minute warning. Or set a timer for me. Something that they generate, suggestions that they want to try, you have to be open to, right? Because that involving them in the process is really going to help it. And right, resist that urge to just shut it down and take the external control. Because we're the external control. What could we do to help build the internal control? Whether it's at, time management or shifting from one activity to the next.
In trying as a parent not to overfunction and be the executive function for the child, especially when they become teenagers, I hit upon a wall of the resistance of a teenager wanting to do their thing their way. And so I couldn't do it. And there was so much resistance that every strategy that I tried, whether it was making lists or setting up alarms on her phone or giving her calendars or anything I tried, there was just like, no, not doing it. No, that's not the way I function. I'm not doing it. And it really was really hard. The whole teenage high school phase. Was just me being locked out of any strategy or suggestion or any approach. And yet I still had to make all the appointments, or at least some of them, doctors or whatever. I still had to do so much. And now that she's in college, I see her sometimes succeeding and sometimes failing, and I have no control, and I've just had to let it go. And sometimes it's very costly mistakes because she misses deadlines.
Sure.
And so there's deposits that are lost. There's opportunities that are not, get done because she just doesn't read the email, just doesn't bother to do things. And I just have to be like, she's 20. I can't.
Yeah.
She's in college. I'm here. But that resistance in high school, a teenage resistance, that's appropriate and normal, was hell for me as a parent.
Same.
Hell.
Yeah, my 22-year-old son. Yeah, same thing. Middle school. As much as we try to do these things and build that culture as early as we can, because we know that these are developing from birth, I think the more open they are to problem solving on their own, because ultimately that's what you end up with at middle school and high school, is they want to do this on their own. So it becomes us imposing those explicit structures on them, whereas we have to invite them into the process. And if we can build that sooner rather than later in a more non-threatening way, because that, and I've experienced exactly that failure When you try to do it in the moment, when it has to do with their schoolwork, something that, yes, is important to both, but they want to own that, and it's got to be their terms. Trying to do it using something that's less threatening and get them a little bit more introspective and reflective about, well, what do you think you should do here? What's going to help you remember? Getting them to think about those kinds of things too. I still have that with my son, 22 years old, trying to, save some money to move out. He's got to come up with a plan. So what are you working on to move out? What are your plans? How are you saving money? And if I ask too many questions, done. What's your plan? Well, here's what I'm doing. I'm putting X amount of dollars away in paycheck. I'm, looking for roommates. Okay. He's got a plan that he owns.
Like you're doing all those things, right? And like somebody said about time management. Do you give your son, okay, you have till the end of the month? Or is that too threatening? You don't
I think every child's different. I think, and every family situation's different. He's got a set time. Like he told us, I want to be out by this time, which not as soon as I thought. No, it's okay. No, I'm fine with it. But like I said, it's empowering, because that works for him. For him, it was, resisting anything we put in place with the resource teacher. You're making me go. I can figure this out myself. So finally we said, and this was the resource room teacher told us this, let's see what he has to say. And what does he want to do? And he was much more obliged to following his plan than ours. And it's the same thing right now in his life plan.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked that is because, I'm sorry, when do you let your kid fail? Like he or she's gonna.
You
like
have
to
to.
what
I
point
know.
you're saying those things? You need to do those things, and it's like, you know what?
I didn't
I'm
want
just
that
gonna let
either.
it fail.
I didn't want that either, right? But we can't. We've got to prepare our kids, right? That saying, we prepare our kids for the path, don't prepare the path for the kids, because we'll be doing it forever. And sometimes, the failures are costly. Yeah, my son had to drop out of college for him to learn. It was costly, but message was sent that, okay, I tried it. My plan didn't work. So I got a new plan now. So. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. I have a middle school son who's suddenly extremely wanting to be independent and wanting no reminders whatsoever for anything. And he wants to arrange himself, which is great. I'm so happy for that. But at the same time, we continue to forget things or don't do things. And I'm navigating this line of not wanting to be the reminder and the authoritarian, and you need to do this and command him, and give him that freedom and not squelch his wanting to be independent. So any advice on how to navigate that?
Yes. Advice from failure once again. You're like, this guy's a terrible parent. No, it's something that happened in school with our teachers. And this was very much a collaborative process with our teachers, many of whom have hung on for the past 12, 15 years and have been part of it since day one. What we start to realize sometimes as we start to move this external locus of control, because we're the frontal lobe in elementary school, and the middle school teachers are trying to give the more over to the kids, late elementary, early middle, is that we start to recognize what's not there at the expense of recognizing and validating what is. You hear teachers all the time saying, you need to inhibit. No one's inhibiting. That's because they probably don't know what it is. Right? You're telling them about something that one student who was new said, I don't even really understand what it is, so I don't know what I'm doing. Wisdom from the mouths of babes, right? So I think about that as a parent. And once again, with my 22-year-old, what are some of the things that are going well? Right? And that's what you have to focus on first. That's going to be your entry point to what's not going well. Well, the other day I forgot my book. All right, what do you think? What can you do? I do that sometimes too, and that's going to come up in these last 4 slides. But, As much as we can identify, especially now we're adults, he's an adult, or he's supposed to be. No, he's, and we're, working with that, Yeah. Is Uber Eats costly? Yes. Could you get in your car and go pick it up yourself? And it's cheaper? Yes. Something I have to deal with. But how's the money? How can you save more? Well, then the other day he said, well, I've cut down on Uber Eats. All right. Whether he did or not, at least he's recognizing it, right? And I know that that's the step that I didn't have to say. Because the minute I say it, you see it sucks the air out of the room. Well, you can cut, I did X, Y, and Z really well, and you went to A, I think that's the hard part. As teachers, as parents.
If you layer the executive functioning on top with, like, say they have dyslexia or some kind of learning disability, how do you overcome the executive functioning challenge with those, overlapping?
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we're doing in tandem at our school. And it's not an infomercial, but that's what we do. I think what's important for me, for the executive function piece, is that all of these tasks they can help outside the classroom in the home, but they can also help in the classroom. And it's some of these skills that I think our kids need to develop, and the research is going in that direction. How do kids use executive functions? We're involved in a study with Vanderbilt University. Dr. Lori Cutting is a primary investigator. How does executive function impact reading comprehension? How does that active engagement do that? It's just another, I think, tool in the arsenal of our kids who sometimes have these innate abilities that unfortunately get tamped down in the system of support, right? They're not allowed to use them. So giving them those opportunities, how would you go about reading this? What would we do first? Let's look at the pictures. Let's look at the title. What type of passage is this? What do we already know about this? So as we're reading, maybe that's going to help us with some of the more challenging vocabulary, the words in the story. When and where are we at our best to do our homework, to do our practice? How do we learn our spelling pattern best? Bringing those into that, I think, can bridge that gap too. So we have our teacher's parallel plan now. So here's the academic task. What's the EF load, right? Teacher had a science lesson. I observed it bombed. And she knew it. And she's been there for 20 years. She said, Jeff, came in with your plan. She looked at the EFs and she goes, look what I didn't do. So it's starting to think about that for our kids, like those opportunities to make those connections in the homework setting. Maybe this isn't the right time to be doing homework. And that's what's causing this. Maybe you need more frequent breaks, or tell me what you need. Asking them how they go about things gives you a lot of information, but it also validates and empowers them. Because no one's asking them that. They're telling them what to do at this stage.
All the classic games, which I love.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on computers and screens? Because whilst I have a middle schooler, it's great. He loves all the games. They're still doing their homework on paper. But I've got a high schooler who, through COVID, had to do everything on computer. And I feel like I'm losing him to, you can't really claw back any of those strategies because he's got to be in his room doing homework. Well, is he doing homework? Not really, because they've got these screens that are constantly drawing them away.
Yeah.
And the schools aren't giving them homework on paper.
Yeah.
So that they can then actually focus on their homework. And then whilst we want to play these games as a family, like we've got all of those board games. He's always like, well, Mummy, can't we just play video games? Can't you play Just Dance with me? I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
I want to play all of the games.
I think sometimes, a couple things there, a couple layers there. I think sometimes, It's important to acquiesce. Just Dance, yep, I played that. There's definitely some negotiation in terms of let's play our game tonight, your game tomorrow. I think for us, we were fortunate because when my kids were in school, they introduced Chromebooks. So they were limited in capacity in terms of they used their Chromebooks to do their homework. There wasn't much more they can do on them. And then they had their, game systems, their computers, whatever, but there was always a structure. When are we going to do this? And you can tell me, but here's what's happening. When you're committing to this schedule, if you're playing video games before dinner, then you're doing homework after dinner, that's not negotiable because you agreed to the plan. I've had a terrible day. I want to just play some video games, decompress before I do my homework. Good. Okay, but what time are you going to start the homework? 4 o'clock? Okay, sounds reasonable. And then we'll do that. And it's hard because that is their interaction. But I do think, sometimes you can use the video game as a leverage point. What draws you to that game? What is it that you're doing? And that can bring out some of that EF if you're listening carefully. Sounds like that involves a lot of planning. Sounds like there's a lot of, trying and trying again and reevaluating. That's an important skill to have. That's a life skill. Yeah, it's hard because technology is pervasive. It's here to stay. So.
I was just going to add that your experiences with your son are almost exactly like mine with my daughter. And just wearing my occupational therapy hat instead of the parent hat, if anybody has younger children, just my recommendation, which I wish I had done with my daughter, was start working on budgeting from the time they're really little, and being conscious of giving them like an allowance and saying, this is what you got. And you run out. The consequence is there. You just don't have any more. You spent it all on whatever candy or ice cream or whatever, or a toy. Had I done that early on from the beginning with her allowance, even when she was little, she would be in a so much better place today, because as a 20-year-old with very poor inhibition and lots of other issues, she cannot budget and cannot stay within a budget. And she's just overspending to the nth degree right now in a semester abroad in London. And she just has no clue. And I really blame myself for that. And I know I could have done better all along. So for anyone out there with younger kids, it's not too early to start when they're little.
Thank you for that.
I need to say something about that too. I mean, I have that same situation with my husband. So who was here before, but then he left, so I can say this. This isn't something that they learn through the air. It just isn't. And you always think as they get older, they're going to learn through friends. They're going to see it. It's going to be easier. But unless it's taught from childhood on and then done over and over again, it really doesn't just come.
And that's where I think, thank you, Eve, for that. When we think about, our opportunities at home, it's that validation because it's happening. We're just not recognizing it. And hopefully with this information, you're more empowered to put a label on it and say, hey, that's great. You hit the go button. You're getting started. You were frustrated, but you were able to find a way to regulate. And it's those experiences, I think, that are going to imprint. Something as small as budgeting for anything. If you want to go to the store, do you have money? Did you earn any money? It's going to, over time, build. So any seeds we sow, even through the EF lens, are going to empower our kids. And involving them in the development of those strategies is really that one I caution, Don't put the controls on them. Don't tell them the strategy. Get them to input. What's the ultimate, right? The ultimate is when they come up with a strategy that you would have suggested. Like, oh, thank you, because I think that one's going to work. But, sometimes they're not. But if they come up with that strategy and you're willing to give them a try, we talked about when do you let them fail? Yeah. All right, that didn't really work, but we'll go back to the drawing board. Or how can we fix it? Or here are the things that did work. How do we fix the ones that didn't? There's opportunities there. And take every one of those opportunities to be that executive function role model. Show them too that you just didn't learn these through the air, that you had these experiences. Tell them, share with them those stories, but also in the moment. Yeah, I'm never going to remember all these things. I got to make a list. Or I got such a busy day tomorrow. I'm going to put some stuff out. Can you help me? I got to get some stuff together tonight. I'm really stressing over this presentation at the library, and I'm up against mommy and me. Can I run this presentation by you? But that was me last night with my daughter. But those are some of the things I think we want to make sure we're doing. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts? Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And then it's a spiral. Yeah. No, yeah, I can give you some, and hopefully this will help. I say this both as a parent and also as an instructional leader, because many of the teachers are now my kids' age. So I've been doing this too long. But what I tell them a lot, and my wife and I have this conversation all the time, is you got to start small. Sometimes we go for too much, right? Don't look at it as your time management everywhere is awful. It needs to be fixed. Find one thing we can succeed in. Is it getting out of the house on time? Is it getting to one appointment a week or in a given day? Because sometimes we do that. We go too far. We want it all solved in one day. And even telling those teachers, what's the primary issue here? Is the kid comes to class late, he walks in, he's out of sorts, he's disruptive, he wants to talk to his friends, he panics because he doesn't have the assignment written in. What do you deal with first? What's primary? Work with him on a strategy to get there on time. Step one. That's it. And validate it when he does. And I think the same thing at home. What's the one thing that's working? Find one area of common ground. What can we work on? How are you going to do it? And validate it. We say it to ourselves. My wife and I say it to each other all the time. We went for too much. We're asking about the budgeting. We're asking about how much money do you have? How much do you think you're going to have? How much you saving? That's good. You thinking about increasing it, or are you good where you are? Okay, good. Went far enough with that. I hope it helps. Because you have that emotional piece is, then you're going to say, okay, that's great, one in a row. But that's a start.
Is functioning properly at a certain age. As you two both mentioned, there's some challenges, and the budgeting was a good tip. What other things, my concern is you empower them too much and they don't want you part of anything because they're like, I could do it my way and this is my plan, and mommy, don't tell me what to do. I'm already getting that from an 8-year-old and even a 5-year-old. So like, what can you do to, I don't know, make sure that they get to a certain age, like 20, they're independent now. And they're not just like, I know everything. It's, like, could you overdo the executive functioning? Is it like
Yeah,
You know what
I
I
think
mean?
you can. I think you can. I think, they certainly, it's something here that what we're trying to create at home is more of a generative, pick your opportunities to do things in a non-threatening way, play, make those connections, validate, but there still need to be, yeah, rules and routines. Just like our teachers, we didn't take this and say, well, what happened to our behavioral structure? I said, this isn't behavioral. This is metacognitive, right? This doesn't replace your routines, your behavior management plan, your systems in place to your absolutes. You still have to have your absolutes. I think that's important, and that's what we would say to our kids. They're non-negotiables, you know. That's it. That's the rule. When grandma and poppy show up, you just drop everything and you come say hello. Not negotiable. I didn't want to even discuss it. Some of those things I think have to be bedtimes in place, things like that. And there's going to be times where, yes, we have an opportunity to be flexible and, use that as an opportunity or a generative approach to working them in. But yeah, I still think they have to realize that. And once again, we can be that role model. There are just some things that I have to do. If I don't show up for work, I don't get paid, and that's just the way life is for everyone. And it's kind of balancing that message. Any other questions? Yes.
And I have other children too. And so, just to what you said about how you balance, like, not dampening them, but also like empowering them that learning different is okay. But when they feel like everyone does everything easier than them, especially my other children, that he'll be like, they don't spend as much time on homework and all of this stuff. So, just your thoughts on how you continue to lift them up when they get like so much support, like at school, and they feel maybe that they aren't doing enough.
Yeah, that was hard. I mean, I experienced that as a parent as well. My son is a twin, a sister. Same thing. When he came home to level D book, she'd come home with the level H book. That kind of stuff. He had a lot more support, and I think it's just about being comfortable and owning that you learn differently, but finding these areas that were and are the strengths. I said are some of those things. Anything that has to do with computers, figuring something out on the computer, how to hook up the printer, done. He's got it. And those are some of the things. Yes, they don't translate to helping your workload at school, but in life, these things are going to be helpful. I think at a younger age, it was really making sure we promoted the heck and validated the heck out of what his islands of competence were, just so he, didn't feel that it all hinges on school success, which is hard, because I think of, where we are in the world. And at this point in time too, that's how kids are measuring that, outcome. So I think it's hard, I think, but I think that's why in the beginning we start with, think of something your kid's good at. I always reframe back to that with my son. Let's think. I always try to start a conversation with something he's succeeded in or done well with, and I think that helps with some of the reality of the fact that, yeah, it's going to take you a little bit longer than the next person. Thanks. Anyone else?
Is
The
it on?
back.
Yeah, it's on. I just want to go back to the comment/question about how we regulate ourselves as parents when we go into really frustrating moments. I have a 16-year-old. I'm also been in the field of behavior and social skills for a long time, and you would think that, right, if you're in the field, you'd be able to just be like and do
That's a myth.
the best things, right? But it's not true, right? And I think one of the things that has helped me as a parent, first and foremost, who
sometimes struggles with having the best things to say in the moment or the best ways to redirect, is to sometimes just share some of my own emotional struggles out loud, right? So I acknowledging, hey, this situation feels really frustrating for the both of us. Why don't we go, step outside the box, think about it for a little bit, come back to the table, but also give yourself grace as a parent, because you're not always going to do and say the best thing that you want in the moment, right? And it's not so much about doing things perfectly all the time as it is about recognizing, hey, okay, I could have done that better. Let me see how I can tackle that differently in the future. Because if you beat yourself up too much, then you're going to get to this place where you feel helpless, and then you really won't be able to help your child. So I thought I would add that.
No, I appreciate that. I think that is to me, yeah, I've experienced that too. To me, it's objectivity. We care about every human being that we work with, if we're in whatever field we're in. And if we're working with kids, I care about every student, but it's a different level when they're your own kids. And it's hard to be objective. That emotional element comes in. And that's where we took it a little too far. Let's just stay with the facts. What do we want to see? We want to see you coming home at a reasonable hour during the week when you go out. Okay, that's it. Let's have a conversation. What can we do? And those are some of the things I think that, we have to keep in mind. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time and your participation and your thoughts. And thank you, Eve, once again. Mrs. Sato, thank you very much for hosting this. I enjoyed the time together. Yes, Eve's going to email the slides to everyone. Is that correct? Yeah, so you'll have the slides. And the packet's going to be down. It'll come as a PDF as well.
Okay.